all across America and around the world. This is Veterans Radio. This is Veterans Radio.
Good day. I'm Jim Fossone. I'm the officer of the deck today here on Veterans Radio, and thanks for joining us. We've got some interesting stories for you. We always want to remind you you can find more about Veterans Radio at its Facebook site or at the web, veteransradio.org, where we're on the web 24/7. You can find a lot of our podcasts there as well. We post new ones every Tuesday, so you can get a new story, a new interview, something you didn't know before by going to veteransradio.org. And before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors. First up, we want to thank National Veteran Business Development Council, nvbdc.org. It was established to certify both service-disabled and veteran-owned businesses. You'll find out how they can help your business by going to nvbdc.org. We want to thank Legal Help for Veterans. Legal Help for Veterans fights for veterans' disability rights all across the nation. You can reach them at 800-693-4800 or on the web at legalhelpforveterans.com. We just want to remind you that Veterans Radio podcasts are available on all your favorite streaming platforms, including rss.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Rees Across America Radio. So wherever you are, you can find us, whether it's on your mobile phone or your computer or your laptop, your tablet. But listen in to Veterans Radio Podcasts. We post something new every week, and you're going to find it informative. Today we're going to talk to an Air Force veteran and an Army veteran. Both of them have been involved in equine therapy in a couple of different ways, and we're going to bring this to you maybe so that you can learn what equine therapy is. That's dealing with horses, by the way. But also you may find that this is something that is of interest to you or a friend, is maybe an option to deal with some issues. Equine therapy is practiced all around the nation. One conversation is coming from Colorado, another one's coming from Michigan, and there are organizations specific to this issue that we'll talk about. So listen in about equine therapy.
We want to welcome back to Veterans Radio Colonel Michelle Ruehl, Air Force veteran. Michelle, welcome back.
Thank you.
Well, we're glad to have you. We'll talk more about your military career at the end because it is kind of fascinating. But you're involved in a nonprofit called Stable Strides, and folks can learn more about it by going to stablestrides.org. It's involved in equine therapy. Yes. So, Michelle, you've been involved in this since you were a cadet at the Air Force Academy. So a few years ago, we might say.
Couple decades.
Tell us how you got involved and what equine therapy is.
It actually goes back prior to my military history. When I was growing up in Detroit, I used to go up north in Michigan to a horse camp. And at that horse camp, it was run by a church. They did a few different programs that could help teens that had gone through transition or troubling times. And I used to volunteer to help feed and muck out stalls and lead the horses. And I thought, well, that's interesting how a horse interacts with someone who's going through some mental health and challenges. But I'll never see that again. And then it turns out I went out to the Air Force Academy in Colorado. And in our very limited time, we were allowed to go do volunteer projects. And I heard of an equine therapy center, which used to be called Acts 1911, which addresses doing miracles for a community. At that time, it was called Pikes Peak Therapeutic Riding Center, and I had to borrow an upperclassman's car at the Air Force Academy. I would drive 40 minutes out, and I just, again, volunteered to be a horse leader and what's called a sidewalker. A sidewalker is someone who helps someone who's in a wheelchair mount onto a horse, and you hold on to the lower half so that they can feel riding and what walking feels like, but it takes a sidewalker on either side. And there's an accreditation body called PATH, and that's Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship International. It's an accreditation body that does certifications. So I thought, well, I'll get a couple certifications, but I probably won't see this again. As it turned out, every military base that I was stationed at as a pilot, within 20 minutes, there was an equine therapy center. But over the last 2 decades, it wasn't well known and there wasn't a lot of evidence-based research. It just seemed sort of an alternative therapy that might be for some people, but not for others. But I always found a place. For instance, when I was stationed at Beale flying the MC-12, there was a therapy center about 20 minutes outside the South Gate, and I was able to work with them called Warrior Soul. When I was in Virginia, of course, that has a lot of horse history, but I was able to find a therapy center, also Little Rock, Arkansas, and then, of course, Colorado. So I kept up my certifications thinking I would do it part-time, and I did for a while. I'm a therapeutic riding instructor, so I can help people who have different types of disabilities, whether that's speech, occupational, physical therapy. It's called hippotherapy on a horse. And then I also started digging into other types of work with horses, including mental health. So I also have a certification, Equine Specialist in Mental Health and Learning. Long title, we shorten it to ES for Equine Specialist. And I combined that with I'm now a life coach that helps veterans and military members deal with addiction, recovery, grief, and suicidal ideations. And the reason I started moving towards mental health with horses is I was noticing at every single base, there would be people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan who didn't want to do traditional talk therapy, but they were willing to go out and work with animals. And I thought, well, I'll just sort of stay involved peripherally. Well, after my 21-year military career, I recently retired, and I was doing some part-time work with now called Stable Strides. It's under its third name change. And I was just doing Mondays and Tuesdays, and I was working with some children, and I started noticing that we didn't have the same veteran and military population that we'd had over the last 2 decades. And so I joined the board. I joined the board of Stable Strides. And I thought, well, that might be a way to help. I was recently elected to a school board. I'm on another board at Mount Carmel Veterans Service Center. So I thought from the executive level, I can help expand our services back to serving the 330,000 veterans we have in Colorado, 7% of our state. But we also have 30,000 active duty and reserve military members here from all over the country. And I get more phone calls a day requesting these services, which we can get into in a minute. But the point is the demand is high and people are looking for this type of therapeutic environment as they're coming back with moral injury and PTS. After I was on the board for a little bit, the previous executive director resigned with some family issues. And so we looked around the room going, where are we going to find an immediate executive director who can work with veterans and military, who can start now and can expand our program? And I thought, well, that's hard to find. Turns out.
You learned nothing in the Air Force, you volunteered. So, come on, you should have known better what this was going to get you into.
I do. So now I am the executive director of Stable Strides.
Talk a little bit about, because there is now more research and we're learning more, maybe it's just getting more exposure to equine therapy. What is it between a horse and a person who's having their own challenges that sort of is a connection that makes this work for some folks?
Yeah, I can put it in a nutshell that our, ancestors used horses quite a bit because they knew something that we have sort of forgotten in our kind of modern Western medicine. And that's that a horse, it mirrors human behavior. But what a horse can't do that humans are very good at doing is they can't hide their true feelings or anxiety. So they're part of a herd. And horses just want to know all the time, am I safe? So they turn to humans as part of their herd as long as they feel safe. But when they don't feel safe, they act out. So they may show anxiety, which we can see in their ears and in their body, in their behavior, their breathing. But horses also have the mentality of about a 4 to 7-year-old child, and they can sense our heartbeat, human anxiety, and our behavior at up to 4 to 5 feet away. So what a horse offers for you is a mirror to what you're trying to hold in and compartmentalize. And you may not want to sit on a couch and do traditional talk therapy. So what we do with equine therapy is we'll have a client work with a horse and with a specialist. And then we ask the horse and the client to sort of lead this session. And it's not that there's no objective. There's a very clear objective. But I'll give an actually concrete example. I worked with a gentleman from Fort Carson who was a sergeant who was really struggling with anger management and with domestic abuse. And he knew that he was being violent towards his spouse. but he couldn't quite put a finger on when it was coming up. He would come home and feel like he was calm and he could handle being with his spouse, but something would trigger him after a couple tours in Iraq. So I chose a horse for him that did have high anxiety. It was very high spirited, but it was kind. And all I said was, hey, go grab that horse, go try to go bridle that horse and bring it to you. And the horse would back away and wouldn't get anywhere near him. And this guy had horse experience. And he kept saying, I don't understand why I've ridden. I know how to do this. How come he won't come near me? I didn't have to say much because I watched as he tried to do some deep breathing and calm himself down. The horse would approach. And as soon as he would start to walk towards the horse again, the horse would back up. And immediately he looked at me and he said, I didn't realize I was giving off this much anger or anxiety. And he said, is this how my wife feels?
Wow, that's powerful.
He came to that conclusion and realized he was putting out this anxiety, but the horse can't hide it. Like we wear a mask, we hide behind, I'm fine, I can handle it. Well, they don't do that because everything's a predator. So they have to communicate in a herd to say danger. And so they give us a mirror to our own challenges and our own mental health struggles, which even I have participated in. And I'd be happy to share how it helped me as well.
Well, we'll come back to that for a moment, but I think this is one of these things, and we've been talking to veterans on Veterans Radio for 20 plus years now. There's no one silver magic bullet that deals with the problems veterans may have on emotional or anger or PTSD. So you have to find the therapy or the approach that the veteran's comfortable with. And I think at the VA for a long time, they just gave you, take these pills, that's it, one size fits all. But that's where equine therapy comes in. For some folks, this may be the right therapy that works for them, that they can connect with while they didn't connect with a variety of other things. And is that kind of what you see as well?
I am seeing it's just another mode. It's another tool in the kit, but for the type of person that is generally drawn towards the military and towards operation and towards relationship and towards being a protector. All of those come out when you're working with a 2,000-pound animal that might be bigger than you, because there's that instinct for us as humans to protect as the animal's part of our herd, part of our squadron, part of our battalion. But at the same time, that animal is also looking to us to provide something and clearly communicate. If you try to hide or lie to the animal, it knows and it won't come towards you and it won't build that relationship. So it's just a different modality, and it doesn't include Western medicine, which you could augment if your doctor says that that's correct. But this is more, how do I work through some of that energy, some of the triggers, some of the PTS, and even grief. Horses are animals that grieve when one is removed or one passes away or when they're separated. They stand and they look for the other. They'll stand in the spot that they were. They'll eat in the same trough and just look for their member. So they really understand that group mentality when a group is sort of separated. And it's just a modality that works for a lot of people that are already drawn to a military lifestyle. But it doesn't require sitting still. You don't have to sit down and talk about your feelings. You can act them out. You can ride, you can touch, you can actually express emotion. And it doesn't even require talking for a lot of this.
And we're talking to Air Force retired Colonel Michelle Ruehl, who's the CEO of StableStrides.org in Colorado, about equine therapy. These animals are, as you mentioned a minute ago, big, sizable. Their care is costly. I know from reviewing StableStrides.org's website, it has an operating budget of about $1 million for, I'm not sure how many horses, I think there's 10 or 12 or something, but this is an expensive proposition for a nonprofit. How do you keep it going financially? There's a positive outcome for people, but still it takes a lot of resources to do that.
It does. This is one of the most expensive nonprofits. It's a large animal that eats and then has vet bills, and they eat a lot. We have it down to grants and donor funding, but to be honest, if every time the horse comes out of the stall, it's about $200 for just coming out. That's overhead operating costs of running a farm and a ranch. We do have 15 horses, but 3 of those are mini. Mini horses are about the size of my Great Pyrenees or smaller. Even those have therapeutic value, having a small horse to work with, and children love it as well. So what we've been really dependent on over the last 2 decades, they've actually been around for 44 years, but for the last 2 decades specifically, has been a lot of VA funding, adaptive sports. There's been all sorts of private donors, but as you know, there's donor fatigue. There's also a focus over the last year that's been on food scarcity, and rightly so. But the mental health of my generation of veterans that are coming home from 20 years of war in Afghanistan and in Iraq, what we don't want is what happened in Vietnam, where we weren't prepared for the mental health challenges of our veterans coming home. Now we know better. So how do we do better? And part of that is this type of therapeutic work is helping for moral injury and grief as well. I mean, my generation, I was working in the White House the night Afghanistan fell, and I have many people coming to me going, I still have my interpreter in Afghanistan. I'm feeling all of this sort of grief and I can't get them out. And so we actually have horses that help process some of that grief and also loss from the war. But if we want to do better, it means having about 12 to 15 horse capacity to be able to do the services. And each horse is about $10,000 a year. So we look for corporate sponsors. We're always looking for someone to sponsor an entire horse for 10 or a partial horse and help with those payments. And honestly, I don't take a paycheck as the executive director. Right now, I feel like my heart is in giving that back so that we can give scholarships to our military. But the other thing that we're really struggling with is the cost of having a therapist that accepts TRICARE. So for our active duty members here, we have 7 military bases right here in Colorado, 5 within driving distance from my equine center. And so I get calls every morning from the military bases saying, can you take someone? And right now we can only accept, we have one therapist who takes TRICARE for children, which is very important, taking care of our military members' children who are experiencing secondary effects of their parents' trauma and PTS. But then also we used to have therapists who could accept TRICARE, but as you can imagine, a nonprofit that has to feed horses and keep the lights on a ranch, we don't have the same funding opportunities to be able to fully pay for a therapist that's in private practice. So this has to be someone who we can pay through grants and donor funding, but they also love working with our military veteran population. They choose to do it. They choose to do it through a nonprofit. So we also are looking for people that might be listening to this. They go, I could do that for 4 hours on a Friday. And then we're looking for those donors to help supplement the cost. It costs about $200 per session to pay out of pocket. And we know that for a lot of our military members, that's just, it's a high cost, but the return on investment is life-saving.
Well, and I want to suggest to our veteran radio listeners, if you're an individual or a corporation or a foundation, you know, somebody who might be thinking that they could support equine therapy, go to stablestrides.org. You can see their tax information. There's a lot of financial transparency there, which I was glad to see. I'm sure they can reach out to you, Michelle, as the executive director there. But let's find ways to keep these kinds of programs available at a cost or a reasonable cost or no cost to our veterans and their families. I love the fact that you're helping veterans, children of veterans as well, because they so often get left out of the deal, right? Maybe mom or dad can go to the VA for care, but you know there's no care for the kid, and they do suffer silently often with those problems that are brought home. Is there federal or state grant money also available for this sort of work, or is that diminished in today's environment?
The federal grant funding is paused for now, but I am an English professor on the side, so I set my alarm every morning at 4 a.m. I'm also our grant writer, and I'm putting in 2 right now that are larger grants asking for continued funding, but it's actually, you mentioned the children of veterans. We're starting a new program, and it's literacy intervention. Because I'm on a school board, we actually have 23,000 students in our school district, and the children are only reading at 38% proficiency across grade level. And many of these are veteran and military children who've moved around a lot and who have issues with either English as a second language or literacy in general, just from moving and not having constant educational care. And so we've started a literacy program, and it's in a national called Horse-Powered Reading, but we have started it at our center, and it's 2 retired school teachers, one's a principal, and it's to reach out to the military and veteran children and be able to do literacy intervention prior to 3rd grade and then 3rd grade to 8th grade to help reduce that gap. And then secondary, we also, we accept Medicaid, but that barely covers 1/3 of the cost for children that need intervention for behavior and mental health that are in middle school. We're seeing a high rate of suicidal ideation in middle schoolers. And so what we're able to do is bring them out and do some group work. But again, the cost is prohibitive for a lot of families that actually need it. It's a catch-22. So we look for funders to help us keep those programs going for the children that are here and then our military families that rotate through.
So we normally start our veteran radio programs talking about our guest's military career so that our listeners know that this person maybe has walked in their boots before. We didn't do that here because I wanted to get right into equine therapy and the current need at Stable Strides that I'm hoping some folks will reach out and help support. But Michelle, let's back up. I think we mentioned you went through the Air Force Academy, you became a pilot, you flew overseas. Tell us a little bit about that. Then we also touched on you were in the White House. Well, you were a White House fellow, and again, recently retired back to Colorado with your husband and family. Your husband, a former Air Force pilot as well. But tell us a little bit. Let our listeners know that you're the real deal.
Well, I graduated from the Air Force Academy in 2003, and then I went on to fly the C-130 and then the MC-12, which is a King Air 350 that does manned intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So I did my tours in Afghanistan, and we would fly over continuous operations so that we could watch the ground and we could send down real-time surveillance to the ground troops so they could make battle decisions. And we could also do battle damage assessment. But while I was there, I got very close to the Afghan people. I also taught English. So in addition to being a pilot, I was an English professor at the Air Force Academy. So I did a lot of volunteer teaching for the young girls in Afghanistan, teaching English, and some young men that were there. So I also had interpreters. And when it came time to come back to the US, I was a White House fellow under both President Trump and President Biden. And I did speech writing, military advising. And like I said, I was there the night of the Afghanistan fall. And then I went on to the Pentagon. I did future warfare in the Joint Staff. My final assignment was the Air Force sent me back to work at NORAD in Cheyenne Mountain. So I was the Deputy Command Center Director watching all of the missiles around the world. And now I still work with the Air Force Academy as an admissions liaison officer. And I'm also one of the theater officers in charge. So we're doing Fiddler on the Roof. But I bring all that up to say I went back and forth between flying airplanes and also teaching. So I really had the left and right brain going because I taught English. And what I noticed a common thread through both flying and doing operations overseas and then teaching was really the humanity, that part of it. We can get more and more advanced in technology and AI and our combat systems, but at the heart of it, it's really the people that we need to take care of that are still making the original decisions. And I was noticing a heavier and heavier load on a lot of our young guys who did 11, 12 deployments. So I went and decided to get a master's degree also in psychology and become a life coach. And the reason I did that is because as much as we've worked to reduce the stigma in mental health in the flying community, in the last 3 years, I have lost people that are very near and dear to my heart to suicide because they could not come forward. In the flying community, if we come forward, you will still have the possibility of losing your wings, which to many people is their livelihood. And it's not just the flying community, a lot of special operations. So we're working on getting that to be much more open and reduce the stigma. But the point is, a lot of people won't go through TRICARE, won't go to the VA, but they will go to a private life coach. And if they go to the private life coach like me, I work in the grief and I work in all of these areas to be able to give them an avenue. And I'm not saying go around the military system. I'm saying I'd love for it to augment. I would love for our people to be able to go to their healthcare provider, but also see someone like me who's a life coach that can walk you through a lot of the same challenges that you would talk to with a therapist. So I've joined with a group out here that does retreats for veterans. And we bring people out here who are facing some of the toughest situations you can imagine. suicide and grief and loss, and we bring them out to do a retreat with equine therapy. So that's in addition to Stable Strides. We do that for anyone in the entire country listening. You can reach me through StableStrides.org, and we can talk about those veteran retreats.
Well, and one of the things we try to get when we're promoting nonprofits and supporting nonprofits like Stable Strides is we want our listeners to know, as I mentioned a minute ago, the person organizing it, running it, the person who's going to be a fiduciary of the funds that you donate, has the heart and their brain in the right spot. And clearly, Michelle, you do. We've been longtime friends, so I know better than most, and your family. So I know everything's in the right spot. So we're glad to bring StableStrides.org to the forefront to highlight the value of equine therapy, but also the struggles in today's climate to financially be able to keep something like this going. And we'd encourage folks to go check it out a little bit more, and if you feel compelled to support the cause. So Michelle, really appreciate the time that you've given us today on Veterans Radio.
Thank you.
Military veterans touch everyone's life. I'm guessing right now you're thinking of a veteran, a close friend, relative. Maybe it's you. Even the toughest of us sometimes need help, but don't know where to turn for support. You don't need special training to help a veteran in your life. We can all help someone going through a difficult time. Learn how you can be there for veterans. Visit veteranscrisisline.net. veteranscrisisline.net. A message from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs.
If you have a VA claim denied by the Board of Veterans' Appeals, contact Legal Help for Veterans at 1-800-693-4800. They're experts in handling cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for Veterans Claims. Their number again, 1-800-693-4800.
Now let's hear from a vet who thought, equine therapy's good for my family and my kids to go do it, but I don't need that kind of stuff. And ultimately found himself getting involved with equine therapy kind of after the family did and finding it helpful. He's on the journey now, has not completed the whole coursework, if you will, but has found it to be something that works for him, and that's why we're bringing you this story. It's really about finding what works for you to get through. Maybe it's PTS, maybe it's anger issues, maybe it's getting off some self-medication and finding a little peace in life. Lots of different ways to do it, and this is just one that a little unusual, but it's working for people, so don't write it off. Give it some consideration. We want to welcome to Veterans Radio today an Army veteran of some 30 years, Will Bruck, who was a Chief Warrant Officer for, retiring in 2023. Will, welcome to Veterans Radio.
Well, thank you, Jim, for the invite. It's an honor to be on today, sir.
Well, we're going to talk about your experience with equine therapy, but let me set this up a little bit. As I said to our audience, Will served for 30 years in the Army. He did 4 tours of duty overseas, including Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. Along the way, he collected 2 Bronze Stars, Meritorious Service Medal, a Combat Action Badge. But in his non-military career, he's been a journeyman lineman with IBEW, and he's awfully happy he's not out servicing electrical grids in southeast Michigan in the freezer weather we have at the moment. But it also became a small business owner in the home care business, has a local visiting angels offices in southeast Michigan. He's been elected to the Michigan House of Representatives and is serving District 30. Got a family and a lot of active involvement in things like Disabled American Veterans, Veterans of Foreign Wars, Little Blessings Veterans and Community Outreach, and the Rotary Club. Will, I don't know how you have time for it all, but again, the focus today will be on equine therapy. So again, thanks for joining us.
No, I appreciate the introduction, and yeah, I got a lot of experiences, and hopefully, that comes with a lot of baggage to it at times when you're talking combat tours and such. But working with equine therapy and Little Blessings Veteran Outreach, I sit on the board as the president currently for the last 2 years. And so it's an honor to talk today about equine therapy.
Well, you know, let's jump off there because you mentioned, that much time and the combat tours. It's not unusual. Somebody has a little bit, as you referred to it, baggage, PTS in particular. Tell us about what baggage you had and what led you to try equine therapy.
Wow, that's a loaded question, but they say nobody goes to war and comes back the same. And
no,
it took me 3 tours before I believed that. To be honest, it was, a lot of rejection of changes within, my own psyche. You have physical issues. Anyone that served 30 plus years in the military, you're going to have physical ailments and issues. But when you're faced with the situations and the environment that you're put into, being in combat, that it also changes you mentally, whether you are aware or admit it or not. And so coming home, it was, I was in Iraq in 03 and 04. I call it the Wild West, and it, came home, and I thought I was the same. Looking back, I wasn't. I went again in 09 back to Iraq, and came home even more different, but yet refusing to admit that. I went to Afghanistan in 14, 15, and then when I came home, the wheels fell off. And I still refused, to get help. I refused to admit that I had a problem. And it just caused expounded difficulties between family. And you failed to mention I have 9 children. My wife and I have 9 together, all natural born, all our own.
Well, and your story up until the 9 children is pretty typical. I mean, it's all the guys and gals who've done these multiple rotations. You're gonna, things change, and you may not believe that, but your family sees it, and the family starts saying, "Hey, man, you got to get a little help. Talk to somebody." And I suspect that's what was going on.
I mean, there was a time or two, with my spouse, Natalie. She's a saint. She's endured so much, that she said, you have to get help. And I would get help to the degree that it satisfied her needs. And, but at the time, I take a time period after 2015 that, for 10 plus years, I lived with bitterness and with no regret for anything that I did. In 2020, I went back for my 4th tour, Iraq and Syria. Honestly, I went back. I told my wife I was going back to get fixed. As stupid as that sounds now, but that was my mentality. Like, I'm going to go get fixed. And, I came back thinking I was fixed. I got my last tour in, and, you mentioned my daughter wrote the book. During that time I was deployed in 2020, 21, my family started going through Little Blessings. My wife actually started before I deployed in 2020. For 3 months, she was going weekly to Little Blessings for horse equine therapy. And I didn't know she was even going until she told me after 3 months. And that's how irrelevant and detached I was from my family. And I say that with regret now, but until really recently, I had no regrets on that. And even up until current point, my kids went through the program in 21. They started the kids program, an 18-week program. The adult program is 50 weeks. So it's a whole year long. But when I came back from Iraq in 21, I saw my kids. It helped me. I started to get involved in Little Blessings, but still did not address the issues, the root issues of bitterness and PTSD and the anger and the lack of guilt. And then actually December of last year, I enrolled into the program. So I'm actually new at I was president of the organization, but yet, having never been through the program. But last December, prior to Christmas, we as a family hit a point where I finally admitted I need help that I haven't been getting. And so I'm actually about 5 weeks into the program right now. So that's kind of current. That's 25 years and 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's impossible to do justice to the story in the time we have here in this interview, but I think it's important because people don't be surprised, ashamed, rooted into the ground if you don't, quote unquote, fix yourself right away. It takes years to get to the point where you find something, first off, that you admit that, hey, I need to do something, and you find something that works for you. And for some people, equine therapy may be the thing that works. Now, you live and your family lives in a rural area. You got a little, you might call it a hobby farm. But what led Natalie to equine therapy, and why did you ultimately go, yeah, maybe I need to get with the program?
Well, what brought her to it was the inability to cope with what I wasn't coping with. That's what brought her to the table. She met Jamie Paxton, who started Little Blessings in about 2018. And that's what drew Natalie to the program. And it gave her a lot of things in her toolbox on how to deal with a veteran, being married to a veteran. She now leads the spouse group that meets every other week at Little Blessings. My kids get into the program. And when I came home in 21, I saw my kids in a program, and I remember crying, watching my kids, seeing and talking to the mental health specialist, that was explaining the issues, the problems that my kids were having. And at that point, I knew that my problems, my PTSD was, in a sense, being transcended to my family. Now, I wasn't to the point where I cared enough to fix myself, but I was successful at business. I was a chief warrant officer for. Nobody's going to tell me what to do. I was successful in the military as well as civilian life as a reservist. But bringing me to the table was, we've run 30-some vets through this program, year-long program at Little Blessings, and it has changed the life of multiple families, all these families, not just the vet, but the whole family.
Well, let me give the full name of it. It's Little Blessings Veterans and Community Outreach, if I've got it right. And yes. And Jamie Paxton, who you referred to, who I think is the executive director, she did 25 years in the United States Air Force and came out as a first sergeant. So again, somebody who's been there and knows the personality of somebody who says, I'm a chief warrant officer. What the hell are you going to tell me? Right?
Yeah. And we're the ones that have all the answers. If you've been in the Army or the Marines, the warrant officers are the ones everyone goes to for help. We are the ones that are supposed to have the answers, but when we don't have the answers for ourselves, it's hard as a human being to admit that. So and that was my problem.
So what is it about the horses? Why equine therapy? Why not just go to the VA and talk to a mental health person? Why was it the equine therapy that drew you in?
Well, for me, horses scare the crap out of me, so that's a start. and it's a challenge. Secondly, equine therapy, and specifically EGALA, is the model that we follow. It's a nationally recognized model. It's not going out and riding horses. It's not, equestrian things. It's interacting with the horses, and horses have an innate ability. They're a fight or a flight animal. Their reactions are based off their instinct. Either they're going to fight or they're fleeing. And a lot of times that's where vets end up getting. When I look at my history, coming back from tours and the inability to deal with the issues at home, the children, the upheaval, the arguments or different things that come up, we either fight or we flight. That's a military bred instinct. Horses have that same instinct. And so working with the horses, you're learning how, number one, to identify those problems that you have, but number two, how to manage those problems. And the horses, have this unique ability to do that and to mirror your emotions, your anxiety, and it helps you regulate those things. Now, obviously, I'm only 5 weeks into the program. There's a lot that I haven't seen yet, but that's, this is what it does for the veteran.
Well, and you've been around it, though, now for years through the family.
Yes.
And I want to talk a little bit about, so that you can do some bragging on what it did for the kids, and Anna in particular, the direction that she took it.
It changed my kids' outlook, because as the title of my daughter's book, she wrote Hope on Four Hooves. My family, we're a very religious family. We're Christian. We worship and we believe in God and we have faith. But in the situation with their father, I'll take my daughter was 14 when she wrote the book. She didn't have a lot of hope that things were going to work out at that time. And through the equine therapy, it allowed my kids to learn how to regulate those emotions that were being passed on to them, and to bring hope back to my family, right alongside with God was there the whole time. But, there's the physical and the spiritual, and sometimes the two, one's weaker than the other, depending on the situation. And physically and emotionally, my kids were falling apart because of the anxiety that I had, that I was creating in them. And so, them going through the program and my wife going through the program, it allowed them to get hope back again, that things are going to be okay, and there's a way out of this darkness that we have been placed into.
And this is a if you will, private nonprofit. And I want to point that out because of the family aspect of this. Veterans can go to the VA for mental health care, but VA doesn't do anything for the family. It's not designed, authorized, funded for family mental health care. So things like Little Blessings Veteran Outreach are important, and supporting those are important because it's a family affair, not just a veteran affair. And let me tell you that, veteran radio listeners, we're talking to Will Bruck, Chief Warrant Officer 4, 30 years in the Army, in his and his family's experience with equine therapy. Little Blessings Veteran Outreach, you can find it on the web at lbveteranoutreach.org if you want some more information. As I said, its founder and executive director is a 25-year Air Force veteran, so she knows what she's talking about. Will, as you begin the process of going through the program, is it something that you sort of begin to see changes in yourself, or recognizing patterns before they get too developed? What do you expect to get out of the program?
Right now, I'm learning to recognize the patterns of the horse. So the emotions or reactions of the animal, it takes an eye. So, I used to make fun of my wife, going to talk to Mr. Ed, the horse.
Right.
What's he going to teach us? What's he going to teach you? How does he talk, etc. But the horses have definite reactions based off their emotions. Number one is realizing what is making, the reactions, the good and the bad reactions in that animal. That's what I'm in the process of learning right now, and to regulate and to build trust with that creature in order for that creature to, help me. It sounds, sometimes it's voodoo sounding, but it literally has changed the lives of many, many veterans just in our own community. And again, our organization, the VA, I would question whether the VA mental health helps a lot, but you can talk to somebody once a month or every other month or every quarter. You're discussing problems and trying to fix problems, but Little Blessings encompasses the entire family and the entire psyche of the person. It's a family affair. We have the family dinners once a month. We have the children's program. It's a place where veterans, when they're done with the program, they still continue to come to the ranch to interact with the animal that they went through the program with, and their support. There's other veterans there that have been through the same program or currently in the program that are there to also interact with that veteran. It gives a camaraderie as well as the family getting that support mechanism as well. And again, it's all supported by private funds.
Yeah, the horse picks up on your aggression, right? I mean, if you're hostile, it reacts a certain way. If you can calm yourself, it calms itself. And is that what you're talking about when you say, I'm just learning to read the horse?
Yes, sir. Yeah, if you have high anxiety, the horse is going to exhibit those same symptoms because they pick up, because they're a fight or flight animal. They are unsure of your feeling, your anxiety they can feel. Now, I don't know how they do it, but they do it. And their reaction is either they're going to fight you or they're going to flee. They're going to flee from you. They're trying to decide what they're going to do. And so I'm in the portion of reading those emotions of the horse, but those are really truly my emotions that are coming out in the horse.
Now, this Little Blessings Veterans Outreach is in Monroe County, just a little bit north of the Ohio state line. But these kind of equine therapy programs are all over the country, and there are some, I don't know if I'd call it standards or groups. I know one of them is the Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship International. And you mentioned, at Little Blessings, they're following a sort of a time-tested,
EGALA model, and there's an association, EGALA. It's nationally certified. There's EGALA people that practice the EGALA model throughout the U.S. There's only a very small handful that specifically do it strictly for veterans.
And that's, again, if you're listening to this or on Veterans Radio or the podcast and you're thinking, hey, I got this might work for a friend of mine, or they ought to just look into it, or maybe it's something I'd be interested in, there are resources available. You might have to search them out a little bit, by going onto the internet or maybe talking to a VA social worker, and getting a referral. Again, this is going to be on the private side of things. It's not a VA hospital benefit. That's for damn sure.
No, it is not. I mean, we would love for it to be at some point, supported by the VA, and they see the benefit of it, because there's been conversations even at the local level with the Ann Arbor VA, but it has yet to be adopted by the VA as one of their methods. So, but we'll stay optimistic.
And EGALA, for those of us who are functionally illiterate in this area, which I am, it's Equine Assisted Psychotherapy, EAGALA.org, where, again, you can find, it's got a link for Find a Program, for example, and you can get more information if you're down in Louisiana or you're over in New York. You can probably find something nearby that is worth giving a go. And is it a combination, both, Will, of kind of working with the horse and working with a mental health therapist?
Yes, there's a mental health therapist at the sessions. There's an EGALA certified handler at the sessions. And it's a pretty strict program. Each session is made to address a slightly different avenue, or a different step in the program. You lead the horses, and your commands, you're given commands to give to the horse as you lead it. And the horse will obey or not obey based off your level of anxiety or command, your confidence level. There's so many variables within it, but it's proven to work and help, and we see it working each and every day. Currently at our place, we have 15 or 16 veterans in the program right now. And there's 4 different phases. So they're not all, it's individual sessions, but they're all different times of the week in different phases.
This has been very interesting, and again, I think most veteran radio listeners wouldn't know about this, Will Bruck. They wouldn't be able to maybe suggest it to somebody who this is perfect for. So I really appreciate the time that you've given us today to talk about how it's helped the family, as well as Dad finally getting on board and going, okay, I'm going to, suck it up and do this myself. And see the value. They were probably surprised that Dad finally came around to it, but I bet they're all pretty happy.
I've gotten a lot of positive comments, Jim, from not just from my family, but also other veterans that are, proud or thankful that I took this step, because I am kind of a public figure. I'm a state house rep member. I'm I'm pretty famous in my area. I'm a business owner, and I don't want to say I'm humble, but it takes a lot of humility to admit that you need help. And I've had a lot of veterans reach out to me and say thank you for what you've done.
Absolutely, and I want to thank you for taking time to share this story and give a little hope out there to the veteran community, and maybe looking at equine therapy as something that they ought to do. Will, thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate you, sir.
In the few minutes we have left, I certainly hope you enjoyed learning more about equine therapy, but I also want to tell you about the Congressional Medal of Honor Society Convention, which will be held in Detroit from September 29th to October 3rd, 2026. It features the largest gathering of living Medal of Honor recipients. The convention will bring together as many as 60 living Medal of Honor recipients for a series of public and private events aimed at sharing their stories and promoting the values of the Medal of Honor, such as commitment, integrity, courage, sacrifice, citizenship, and patriotism. The event or convention also includes community engagement activities, allowing recipients to connect with local students, veterans, and active military members. This convention really represents a unique opportunity, the first time in the city's or Metro Detroit's area history that it's been able to bring this kind of convention to the area to honor its military heroes and foster a spirit of patriotism and community engagement. You can learn more about the convention by going to medalofhonordetroit.com. If you're interested in sponsoring or helping out as a volunteer, you can go to that site and put in some information and learn how you or your group or company can participate in this incredible opportunity to recognize the Congressional Medal of Honor Society Convention. One of the men that we're expecting to appear is Ronald Ray. He's an interesting veteran American. He grew up in rural Georgia. He was a high school dropout. He went into the U.S. Army Special Forces. His platoon got overwhelmed with enemy fire in Vietnam, but his calm leadership and absolute resolve to not abandon his soldiers turned the chaos into survival. At one point, he used his own body to shield a wounded comrade. At another, he had to run across open ground to retrieve a machine gun, essential to the platoon's defense. He continued in the Army and ultimately became a lieutenant colonel before retiring. He went on to get all kinds of education after dropping out from high school. And this is kind of the amazing part. His reputation for integrity and strategic thinking quickly carried him into public service roles, including becoming a White House fellow, serving as special assistant to the Secretary of Commerce, and being appointed as the Assistant Secretary of Human Resources and Administrations at the VA. An incredible career, an incredible patriot who will be in Detroit for the convention of the Congressional Medal of Honor Society in the fall of 2026. So you can learn more by going to Congressional Medal of Honor Society site, cmohs.org, and remember to visit medalofhonordetroit.com. As part of that Medal of Honor celebration, we're working on Veterans Radio to pull together all of the interviews we've done over the years with various Medal of Honor recipients. We've actually talked to quite a few of them. They're interesting stories. And we're going to make a spot on our veteransradio.org website. If you go to the listen, we're going to have a Medal of Honor. Pull that bar down, you'll find the Medal of Honor link, and there we will put all kinds of prior interviews we've done with Medal of Honor recipients or about them. So it's kind of an exciting time to be listening to Veterans Radio and participating. We would hope that you'd participate by maybe being a sponsor of Veterans Radio this year. It's always a challenge to have enough dollars in the bank to do this job, and we really do appreciate our sponsors, in particular our local sponsors. You don't have to contribute a lot. You can do it on a monthly basis, or maybe if you're a business out there, you can take on a little bigger role. We want to thank our local VSOs, Vietnam Veterans of America, Charles S. Kettles, Chapter 310, VFW Graf O'Hara, Post 423, American Legion, Post 46, all in Ann Arbor, that continue to support Dale and myself as we're involved in this endeavor. So go to Facebook to check us out, go to veteransradio.org to follow us or donate, and we really do appreciate the ideas that we get from you in terms of content or people we ought to talk to. So send us an email. We're glad to do it, or pop it on Facebook. We'll track it there, or send us a message. Every Tuesday we put up a new podcast, something new that hasn't been played yet. You can check that out. Those podcasts may or may not make their way onto the airwaves based on all the other content that we have. So it's something that you ought to set for a weekly basis and listen in. I think you'd find it useful. Well, I'm Jim Faussone, and it's been a pleasure to bring you these interviews on equine therapy and the Medal of Honor Society. And until next time on Veterans Radio, you are dismissed.